Hello, beautiful family and people, and thanks for joining me today. For those who are on the video, definitely you see that the environment today is a bit different. That's because I am not at home, but that should not stop us. It will certainly not stop me from continuing this journey that we have titled The Journey, in which we are covering the 5 core books of Ellen G. White. And as I've said many times, almost every single episode, this is not meant to substitute Bible study, but these books are to be studied with the Bible. And today we are on part 17 of a many-part series. And chapter 17 of the book Patriarchs and Prophets is titled Jacob's Flight and Exile. And this particular chapter, as we read it through, we can divide this in 5 core parts. The first one being a lesson for us all about how God operates when we really need Him. First. Second, how grateful Jacob received God's promises and His blessings and how he responded to it. That's a second lesson for us. The third part, when Jacob continues to commit to the promise that he had made to his father Isaac, as Isaac was pronouncing over him the blessing. The fourth part, Jacob's respect for marriage and what he did to marry according to what he had promised he would. And then the fifth part, when God asks Jacob tells Jacob that he will be with him as he departs from the land of Mesopotamia under Laban, his family or uncle. So these are the 5 parts that we're going to be talking today. So let's go ahead and get started. This chapter is a bit longer, hence why we divided into 5 parts. But part 1, God aid us in times of affliction. And this portion, so now from the previous chapter, we learned that Jacob had to flee his home. So he had deceived his father to get Esau's blessing. And after he has deceived his father, also made his brother very upset, Esau. And we learned that Esau was a man of the wilderness. He was a strong man. He was a hunter. He definitely had skills that Jacob didn't and a strength that Jacob didn't. So Jacob was genuinely afraid, and because of his deceival to his family, he paid a very hefty price. He had to flee his home, never to see his mother again, that he loved very much, never to see his father, and of course, very afraid that he was going to get killed by his own brother. So from where they were up until the land of Mesopotamia, which is where he was to go and find the wife, he was quite a few miles away. And in this journey, he was afraid. He was afraid, of course, that Esau was going to find him. And he was afraid to talk to people because Esau could be chasing after him. And if he talks to people, they might point him to where Jacob is. So he was quite verily alone, making a very, very long journey, avoiding people and in the wilderness. I mean, these are times where they were in streets or sidewalks or like illuminated pathways. He was quite, alone in the wilderness with wild animals, wild beasts, thieves, bad people. So it must have been a very horrible time for Jacob. And in this time, and you tell me if this is not right, when sometimes we, in our Christian journey, we made bad decisions or we, fall prey to temptation. And when those times come that we feel alone, almost immediately an overwhelming sense of guilt and that we have been a disappointment to God and to the people around us falls over us. And a lot of people fall, very heavily into depression because of it. So now you can imagine Jacob alone in the wilderness, no family, and thinking he had disappointed God severely. he was very susceptible to Satan's voice in the back of his head to say, you are not going to make it, you're a disappointment, you're going to be left alone, God has forsaken you. You tell me if this is not something that we all experience in our Christian journey. And Jacob experienced it maybe 10 times over. So as Jacob is alone in his thoughts, he can't take this sense of being a disappointment to God, and he feels terribly alone. So he goes on his knees and he prays for God to please heal him in this moment of complete and utter devastation, inner devastation. So he goes to sleep, and in his sleep he has a dream. And this is the part where God listens to us because he loves us. We might do things that are not in accordance to his word, but his love is greater than our sin was. And this is a beautiful lesson for all of us, that actually we talked about this in a video a few weeks ago, that I got an internet question: what can I tell myself when I think that I've disappointed God? And the Bible is filled with beautiful promises to those who seek God regardless of what they've done. And this was what Jacob did, and God, was faithful to his promise. God came to his ailment, and Jacob had a dream. And in his dream, he sees a ladder that connects earth to heaven, and in it there were angels coming up and down. And on this ladder, I'm going to read here from the chapter. Before this, in this ladder, basically the angels go up and down, and this is a symbol that Jacob may not have entirely get at the moment, but this represented what Jesus did. Like the ladder represented Jesus, and the angels were coming up and down on Jesus. And for those who might not be familiar with this, what this meant was basically what Jacob was going through was what the world was going through. We sinned, the world was sinner, and before the fall, humans could communicate directly with God. But when sin took over, that ability to communicate with God directly was completely broken. And the only way to restore that was through Jesus. And that's why the people in ancient times had to make the lamb sacrifice representing Jesus' death on our behalf. And once Jesus died, that the sacrifice was fulfilled, then we no longer do sacrifices, but we trust that it is through Jesus that we can get to the Father. And that's what Jacob saw. So there was a promise that humanity as a whole was going to be reconnected with God the Father. And in Jacob's particular case, God says in this dream that he's having, God says that he will, through his lineage, through Jacob's descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed, once again pointing to Jesus. And in this particular case, it was God remembering Jacob, that God has not forgotten the promise that he made to Abraham and to his descendants, and Jacob was part of them. And basically, God is telling Jacob, don't be afraid. I will continue with the plan regardless of what you've done. And of course, this was tremendous relief for Jacob. And now this takes us to part 2. As Jacob, feels again welcome in God's good grace, which, by the way, he was never out of it. As Jacob feels again welcome, he is tremendously gracious about it, and he decides and takes a vote to return to God the 10% of everything that he owns. And this is the concept of tithe, and why tithing is important, because we are everything that we are, everything that we have, everything that we will have or have had is a blessing from God. So giving back to God 10% of what we own, it's nothing. It's just a symbol of gratefulness. So it's a reminder to us that we need to be grateful with God when he blesses us. And we should all keep that in mind. And Jacob, of course, kept that in mind. He was grateful. He built an altar. He put a stone and put oil on it to make that place a remembrance for for deliverance of God during his troublous times. And he was grateful, and he promised to give God the 10% of it all. And now Jacob continues his journey to Mesopotamia under the promise that he had made that he will find a wife in that land. And now we jump to part 3, and that's when Jacob arrived in Mesopotamia. And now we're going to skip through some parts here, but long story short, he finds himself in love with Rachel. And Rachel was the daughter of Laban, and Laban happened to be the brother of Jacob's mother, so his uncle. So he finds himself graciously accepted into the family home, but different from Abraham or Isaac, when Isaac's servant came to look for a wife, right? Isaac had a lot of gifts to bear. But Jacob decided to take his own path to this evil, and he found himself with nothing to offer to marry this woman. And in those times, it was tradition to, if you couldn't provide or didn't have means to support a family, then if you couldn't pay or, show that you could take care of your wife, so the father had the options to employ you in his service and have you work certain amount of years so that you can prove your worthiness as a husband and as a provider. And of course, Laban, Jacob says, Laban, I want to marry Rachel. And Laban said, okay, you work for me for 7 years and I will give you Rachel. So Jacob very respectfully, and this is a lesson for us in marriage. Sometimes we, and by we I mean the modern society, rush into marriage. So this time, the reason why the man had to or either provide money or show wealth or work for the father of the woman he wanted to marry is not only so that he could prove he was a provider, but it was a test to himself if he really loved this person and wanted to commit. Nowadays, some people just marry just for the sake of marrying. Oh, it's such a good feeling that I have. And then, and then divorce comes almost inevitably because these people didn't knew each other well, didn't take the time to really, dig in and realize if this is what I truly want for the rest of my life. So Jacob did commit it. He loved Rachel. He worked faithfully the 7 years to prove his worth to the father, to Laban. And after 7 years, unfortunately, Laban got a bit greedy. He saw that Jacob was a good worker and didn't want to let Jacob go. And he had an older daughter, Leah. And he gives on the marriage night, I guess it was tradition for the woman to cover the face so the husband couldn't see her until the next morning. In the night, Laban married Jacob to his older daughter, Leah. And of course, in the morning when Jacob wakes up and sees that that's not Rachel, he was very upset, rightfully so. And then Laban tells him a sob story about how, he cannot reject her now because, they have already basically slept together and that will be disgraceful to her and that he has to take her. And Jacob felt betrayed not only by Laban, but by Leah, who decided to partake in this evil. But it's almost ironic because he had practiced deceivement in the past and now deceivement was practiced onto him. And anyway, I just found that interesting. But of course, the fact that Leah started the relationship under this evil caused Jacob to love her a little less. Let's put it like that. And once again, lessons for us all. Be honest with your spouse. Be honest with your partner before your marriage. Marriage is for life, and trust is something that takes time to be earned, and very quickly it can dissolve. So be honest. Anyway, Jacob, of course, was upset. He wanted to marry Rachel. So he goes back to Laban and said, you know what? I want Rachel. And Laban said, okay, I'll give you Rachel for 7 more years of work. So he marries Rachel and he works again faithfully for 7 years. And once again, a lesson for us all. We, the people of God, need to show God's character, or attempt to show God's character in everything we do, including our employment. He was very unsatisfied with the situation and with his employer, in this case, his uncle, but he still did his work. He still did the job and the work faithfully. He was a shepherd, and he took responsibility for the sheep at all costs. And then Ellen White makes an analogy between Jacob as the shepherd and how he took accountability for his sheep, and then Jesus as our shepherd, the shepherd of us, all humanity. The Bible compares Jesus to a shepherd, and how Jesus gave his life for his sheep, and how he's very serious about taking care of us and about, guiding us, and how Jacob had, let's call them sub-employees or sub-shepherds, and we are Jesus' sub-shepherds. So Jesus entrusted us with a mission that is to spread the gospel, and we need to take care of Jesus' flock. I think that's the right word, as Jacob took care of his sheep. So beautiful analogy, and our shepherd, Jesus, definitely has gone the mile and beyond for us. So something for us to be grateful about. Anyhow, Jacob worked the 7 more years. He was faithful, but Laban, greed and money and wealth is something, it's almost a curse on humanity. The more people have, the more people tend to want. And I've never really cracked the why behind that, but that's how things are. So in this particular case, Laban got greedy, and he saw that Jacob's, obviously Jacob was working for him, so he was getting paid by him. But God was blessing Jacob because God wanted to eventually separate Jacob from, Laban and make him have his own people, his own lineage, his own descendants. So God, the payment of Jacob, which in this case was flocks and sheep and cattle and whatnot, was multiplying. And even though Laban changed Jacob's salary 10 times, God still multiplied and blessed Jacob. So Laban got upset. Laban's sons got upset. In this particular case, they were, saying this Jacob came here to take all of our wealth, and I guess they forgot that they had it because of Jacob. So Jacob was in a bit of a rough spot because he was afraid to leave Laban's home, because he was still afraid of his brother and what his brother might do to him in the wilderness if he goes out. And then he got scared because if he stayed at Laban's home, then the question was, are Laban's kids going to kill me or get my stuff by violence, because they clearly think I stole from their father. So among, this trouble, he eventually decides to leave. He leaves while Laban was out. Then Laban found out. Laban chased after him, but God told Laban, don't harm Jacob, and don't make him come back. So they meet. Laban expresses frustration. Jacob expresses frustration, but they eventually settle for a, peace pact. And once they do that, then they both go separate ways. And now Jacob is finally on his own, on his way out of Mesopotamia and all of those influences that we've talked about before. And with his family, with his flock, with his people, with his cattle, sheep, he's now blessed. And now he begins a journey on his own. And this is where the chapter ends. So many lessons to be learned. The first one, God always comes to our ailment in moments of distress. We just need to invoke his name and ask for his help. Second, we need to be grateful with God's blessings Okay, it's our responsibility to give back the tithe, and it's not just a checking the box type of thing. We need to show gratefulness by being grateful to others, by being of help. Third, we need to take seriously marriage and the people that we love or we choose to love for life. This is a big responsibility, a big commitment in the eyes of God. So take your time to meet your spouse before you take that step. Then we need to be good workers in our life. We need to act as if we were working for God. Regardless of what we feel, we need to be grateful and we need to commit to our work and do it as if we're doing it to God. And then fifth, once again, trust God. All these lessons in this chapter, I invite you to read it. Maybe you get some more and share them. In the meantime, I'll see you next time.